Good morning. So, thanks for the introduction, and great to see you all here. Can you hear me okay? So, my name's Robbie Nock, and I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship and Professional Practice at ArtCenter. And my background has spanned a whole range of different types of creative and other types of work. And I'll get a little bit into that, but first I just want to give you a really clear goal of what I'm going to talk about today, and the hope is that I can provide a little bit of you can't hear back there. Provide a little bit of actionable next steps for people that want to better utilize design in a variety of different startup and business contexts. So the first goal is, and it is the kind of key to all of this, is startups with a designer on the founding team are significantly more likely to succeed. And there's an overwhelming amount of evidence about this, but oftentimes that's not so easy to wrap your head around. How do you actually integrate design into your operations? So I'm going to give you a little bit of background as to why this is the case, why design is so critical. And then I'm also going to share with you kind of how to think about design in the expanded context. So first, just to give you a little bit of my background, grew up in Boston, actually very close to BU, and lived in between Boston, London, and San Diego. My father was British, and my mother was from California, so I spent a lot of time bouncing back and forth. After high school, I went to the University of Edinburgh in Scotland and studied literature. While I was in high school, I took a darkroom photography class and fell in love with photography. I learned all about the analog process, how to actually create an image from light. It's kind of remarkable that we can do this. And that really propelled me from a career point of view. I spent my entire time at Edinburgh working as a photographer, assisting commercial photographers, developing my own clients, my own relationships, working on behalf of the student newspaper and the Photography Society, and this was my thing. It was about 2003 when the digital transformation of photography really began to actually take shape in a meaningful way for entry-level professionals. I remember getting my first digital camera and being amazed at really the kind of integration of all of this technology in a new way. And all of the photographers that I was working for were really worried. They were really, really worried about what this change was going to bring to the table. So I paid attention, and I started to open my kind of lens, so to speak, to other opportunities that were connected to photography. So I started working with artists and musicians on live shows, so to bring still images into live music environments. And that led to the early days of Vjing, which is essentially video jockeying, which now sounds like the lamest thing. But I would play shows mixing images and video together alongside music, live performance, primarily in London. And that was really taking off. And I still kept my photography practice going. I still shot as many different types of client projects as possible, but this space of entertainment, technology, and music was really inspiring. And that took me from London, where I moved after Edinburgh, to Los Angeles. And I dove deeply into the production environment. So how do we actually create these types of integrated visual experiences for people like Beyonce? A stage show has such technical requirements. There's so much that goes into the preparation and the kind of performance setup. So that took me to LA, and LA is a weird place. And I was trying to find my way around, and this was right before that GPS was really integrated into every phone that we had. It was the end of the Thomas Guide, and I loved those sort of old maps. And I actually enrolled at a program at California Institute of the Arts, CalArts, which is up in Valencia, and maybe you're familiar with it, founded by Disney, the place for the integration of the visual and performing arts. And I was part of a new program called Art and Technology, and that really was to explore the intersection of how these things come together. So while I was there, I was working on sculptures, I was working on still images, I was working on shows, but really in the back of my head there was this sort of drive to do something a little bit different, and I developed a startup idea. It was an app for map sharing called Signpost, and the goal of the app was to personalize mapping so that I or you could take a series of locations anywhere in the world, annotate them with your notes or maybe a video or an image, and then share them as a layer with somebody else. Doing so in an integrated app platform, very much a social media startup. And I had no idea what I was doing. So I sort of pursued it from an artist and a designer point of view and built a lot of the product from a brand and front-end perspective. And I thought I was doing pretty well, and I built a team with people from CalArts and ArtCenter and NYU, and we went to pitch, and people loved it, and they said, well, you need customers and you need traction. And I got that, but I wasn't quite sure how to go about doing that when building such a complicated piece of technology. So fast forward 2 years, a lot of struggle, a lot of iteration, a lot of learning, and I decided that at that point, I should close the business and move on. I hadn't raised the money that I needed. I had paid my team with all the cash that I had saved up over the years, going to college and working and doing all that. So I left the world of being a founder. But what I realized was that my challenge was similar to so many other artists and designers that I knew who were trying to move into a new space, who were trying to find a way to go from one particular craft or way of working into something new. And this really matches the sort of transition from analog to digital, from studio practice to a much broader palette of things that you can work with as a technology-driven artist. So it's no longer just about making a sculpture or putting a painting on the wall, but art exists in a very expanded way. So I just so happened to connect to somebody at ArtCenter, and they said, hey, this is great. We need this at ArtCenter. And for those of you that know, ArtCenter is totally connected to business and industry. We are very, very clear about the return on investment of your education. And we really provide huge amounts of business support for our community. And this is a differentiating factor for ArtCenter. Most art and design schools think of business as a kind of a secondary step, something that maybe you figure out when you get there. But we're taking a lot of money from these students. It costs almost $200,000 to get an undergraduate degree at ArtCenter. There's scholarship, of course, to offset that. But we want to make sure that you can pay that back in whatever field you pursue. So I've now been at ArtCenter for 7 years. I've built programs and services for alumni and students focused on art and design and business. And that takes a variety of forms: conferences and symposia, workshops and lectures. I work very closely with our academic departments on our curriculum, and then I also support our industry partners and their recruitment practice. So, now to the meat and potatoes. It's clear that design improves results for the most successful companies. We all know this, right? So why do startups fail to maximize the value of design as they grow? Right? We all know good design leads to profit and good user experience and good products. But why is that so hard to do at the very beginning, when you're building a company and you're growing your idea from the ground up? So just take for a moment, think about all of the products in your life that you think are well designed, right? Take a little catalog in your head, and now compare those to all of the companies that make those products, and think about how successful those companies have been over the time that you've known those products, right? There's a really clear correlation between a well-designed product and a profitable company. The iPhone is kind of a classic example, Google search, maybe the Tesla. So we've got some clarity there. This isn't just a personal observation either. McKinsey's kind of groundbreaking report on the business value of design from 2018 identified and studied 300 companies across industries and countries. And they identified that those that performed highest in their design metric, which I'll get into, nearly doubled total revenue and returns to shareholders compared to their competitors. That's remarkable. Any startup that's building a product wants to know why and how those companies are so much more effective, right? And not to say that startups are all about making money, like that's a key part of it, but if you're not profitable, you're probably not going to ever penetrate the market that you're looking to get into. So the McKinsey report identified 4 key things that these companies performed very, very well at. And that is analytical leadership. That's leaders that really understand how to think about design and a user experience and a customer experience and a product development process. They focus, again, on the user. So analytical leadership, user experience, cross-functional talent. So our departments integrated within the company structure are the engineers talking to the designers, talking to the product managers, talking to the C-suite. And then, is there continuous iteration? Are these companies continuing to try to improve what they do? So this data is clear, and it's abundantly clear at ArtCenter. The most successful companies hire our students at a remarkable rate. Over and over again, they come back, and they've done so for years. And this has been kind of their secret. ArtCenter, sort of hidden on the hillside in Pasadena, is the sauce that brings exceptional design to some of the world's most profitable companies. So, what can we learn from this? How can we take this evidence and distill that into something that startups at an early stage can utilize? So, for me, the answer is super simple. Successful companies utilize design for process and not only for a single outcome, output, or deliverable. This is absolutely critical. Many times, those unfamiliar with design think of it as color, shape, material, form, maybe a logo, maybe a shape, maybe something that you can point to, right? An output, a physical thing in the world, something that you can look at and describe. But in reality, the true power of design lies in process. It's actually a step behind the output. And this is the key takeaway for all of you today. And this is the thing that you need to apply to whatever it is that you're trying to build. So, we all deal with risk, especially startup founders. And I guess I'd love to take a little survey of everybody here. How many people here actually have a business that they're building or growing? So about 50%. How many people are investors or otherwise engaged in supporting startups that are growing? So a few investors. And then how many people are kind of aspirational entrepreneurs looking for, and then everybody else? Okay, great. So as you're building a company, you take on more and more risk the more time that you spend and the more money that you invest, right? Like, this is just obvious, right? And key in all of this is figuring out ways to reduce the risk, to reduce the liability that the investment that you put into your company fails, right? Like, that is probably the most consistent through line of startups and large-scale companies. So you'll notice here there's 2 paths. There's the traditional path, and there's the design path. It's abundantly clear that design reduces risk by improving your ability to bring insights to your product from your users and your customers in a continuous and iterative fashion. it also hugely helps with managing complexity. The more that you build, the bigger your team, the larger your operations, the more complexity that you have to manage. And without design, that can be a fatal flaw. So let's look a little bit into this early part of a startup's path. You've probably noticed there's a little bump on the blue line, a little early investment. So what does that really mean? Well, everybody knows you have to spend money to make money, right? So the investment in design, integrating design into the very early stage of your product idea, your service, your system, whatever it is that you're building, requires actually a little bit of capital up front to find a designer, unless you are that designer, which probably then you wouldn't be looking to integrate design, you'd already be doing it. And that initial investment is so important because what it does is it sets you up to be able to be much more lean and much more cost effective as you grow. So again, remember, design is not about a single output, it's about a continuous process. So, how does that reduce risk? It's obvious to me, but it's not always obvious to everybody else. So what that means, when you have a designer on your team, and that might be somebody that you pay 1 day a week, right? That might not be a full-time co-founder, somebody that's fully invested in the company and is not taking a paycheck. Even that 1 day a week and that person being involved in your path to market is such a huge investment and such a valuable investment. And that's because designers are uniquely capable of pulling from so many different types of input. So listening to your investor, listening to your user, listening to your customer, listening to your potential not customer, the person that you're not building for, often has a huge amount of insight in what it is that you need to build. And designers are trained to distill these insights and make them actionable. So how? Key to all of this is, again, and it's remembering that it's about process and not about single outputs. And so how do you expand your understanding of design to see that? For me, one of the best ways to think about this is that every stakeholder in your business development represents a different type of user. And as a company that's beginning to grow, you're not just developing one product, you're developing a huge number of products. Your deck is a product, your logo is a product, your pitch is a product, your story is a product, your website, your MVP. All of these pieces are telling a different story to a different type of user, and you can design that. You can design the way that you tell that story and the way that you incorporate that message into each of these outputs that you might need to create along the way. And embedded within all of that is a focus on emotion, experience, and empathy. So experience, we all know what experience means, but what is the experience of a pitch? How does that investor actually hear your message? We all talk about the right order of, going from idea to solution to team to, capital structure. There's a kind of a standard deck, but the best companies design their own way. They design their own narrative, and they distill all of that into a message that differentiates them from every other pitch that investor's heard. And the same holds true with building your team. Say you have a complicated technical project, right? And you need to hire a very, very talented developer, highly trained and highly sought after, and you don't have any money. How the heck are they going to get on board, right? You got to tell the right story. You got to actually understand what's driving them. You got to really bring them to the table. So think about your outputs as all design opportunities. So now we really get into to how this functions for in two different ways. So and we're at this intersection of things. So as you're building your team, and as you're running towards hopefully the open door that might be a wall, you're building a product, a service, or a system, right? Ultimately, you're building something that you're going to sell to a customer or a range of customers, and they're going to give you money. And then you're going to feed that money back into your team, and you're going to continue to build your product, and everybody knows this. So where does design fit in, and how do we actually think about design as a key differentiator in this part of the process? Design represents that input and output. So as you're building your product, the designer is able to bring versatile value to each step of the way. So it's not just about one output, but it's about a continued series of outputs that evolve over time. So your first iteration of your product, all the way to your version 3, with 300 million users and a huge amount of money coming in. Each of those steps represents a different type of design output, but a smart designer and a smart design team, and look, like Apple and Google and all of these companies that are hugely profitable do this every day. They're thinking about a continuous output, a continuous set of deliverables to customers, and that includes marketing materials, that includes different types of products. At your stage, at the early stage, those are actually the key components of your company. Your deck, your logo, your website, your cost structure, your product, the experience of that product. And designers are uniquely capable of bringing each of these to the table at the right time, at the right cost. So that's what we do at ArtCenter. We train designers in a methodology that connects the output that they create, an artifact, an object, a prototype, a model, with the right story and the right learning that comes from that. So, we all talk about the lean model, build, test, learn, and continue, right? But what does that really mean? What does it really mean to listen to your user? And are you bringing an open mind, or are you assuming that you already have the answer? So many startups, and going back to the time and cost issue, they wait way too long to test their product. They spend way too much money on the really cool idea that nobody cares about. And we see this, experienced companies, investors, inventors do this all the time. I don't know if anybody was familiar with a product called Juicero, but it was a spectacular fail. Had major investment from Kleiner Perkins, had an incredible founder. They hired the best industrial designer in the world, Yves Bahar, who's ArtCenter alum. And they developed a product that essentially squeezed a juice packet to produce a little bit of juice. Now, who cares, right? They thought they were onto something. You would order all of these juice packets, you put them in the fridge, they'd come delivered to you, and you put them in this really nicely designed squeezer. But in reality, the first customers realized you don't even need the device. All you need to do is squeeze the juice pack. They were essentially providing all of this infrastructure for something that nobody cared about. And a lot of money was lost, right? And that's fine. So I want you to really take away that this investment in design up front is the most important thing that you can do. It is the most versatile use of your capital. And ArtCenter is an incredible place to find talented designers to bring to the table. Not just alumni, not just people that have had 20 or 30 years of experience. Our students do this all the time. And because they're students and because they don't have a full-time job, they're probably willing to negotiate on cost. They want to experience what it's like to build something from the ground up. And that experience ultimately goes back to companies like Apple and Google, where they get paid very well. So it's an opportunity for you. It's an opportunity for us. And I'm here to. We'll skip that one. I'm here to be a resource in the region and to connect the dots. And the last thing I'll leave you with is that the next step for me, the next step for integrating design and business in our educational model is really exploring what does it look like to collaborate between design, business, and engineering, right? What are the methodologies? What are the biases? What are the ways in which these types of skill sets come together? And how can we actually provide a mechanism to connect talented teams here in the region? We have incredible talent here. So we need to really think about opening up those gates between the different types of thinkers and doers and makers. So thank you very much, and here for questions.
Great. Thank you, Robbie. That was fantastic. So we're going to open it up for Q&A. Does anybody know the rules of Q&A? Our rules of Q&A is that it's a very short sentence with a question mark at the end. It's not a time for stories, but Robbie, you'll be around after if you have any stories you would like to talk to him about. With that, I'm going to open it up to John. If you have a question, please come up here to the left. We have the microphone with the lead again. So any questions, head up here, and then we'll pass the microphone back and forth. All right. Thank you again.
They can be very basic questions, like whatever's on your mind.
Thanks, Robbie. Are there multiple sub-disciplines within the design area? You mentioned industrial design, but can you tell us more about the various disciplines?
Excellent question. So yes, and the disciplines are evolving, but traditionally we would separate it from graphic design, which is really two-dimensional, thinking about layout, typography, brand, logo, and then we would go from graphic design to product design, which is really thinking about shape, form, material, color, manufacturing, the entire package around the product. We'd then go to industrial design, which goes even deeper into the system that produces products. So thinking about supply chain, thinking about management, thinking about business structures. And then our newest two areas are media design, which is really taking computation and design and marrying those and looking at how do you produce compelling media outputs. So that could be, audio, video, image, movie, app, lighting, sensor system, VR headset. And our newest major is interaction design, which is really thinking about the systems that connect when a user uses a product. So interaction traditionally is thought about how do you engage with buttons on a screen, like how do you actually interact with your laptop. But interaction design in the expanded field really represents how do you actually interact with a product before you know about it, all the way through to when it's a part of your life, and to maybe when you throw it away, to when you think about recycling it or whatever might come next. We then have two other subcategories of industrial design, entertainment design, which is really looking at how do you create animation and compelling visual content for screen and for video games. And then we also have environmental design, which is looking at furniture, lighting, architecture, and the sort of physical infrastructure around a space. So what you would probably, as a startup, you could pull from any of those areas. And the key at ArtCenter is that you might have a discipline, but we develop the sort of Swiss Army knives of design. They know how to use all of the different parts of the process. And I think that if you're interested, these tend to be the capabilities that cross all of the different majors and categories. And there's a lot to be used here. So it's great. Did I give you a thorough? Good.
Robbie, just wondering, how do you correlate what you're talking about with real boots on the ground market research? So market research is a great task for a designer.
It's actually one of the key parts of what our education system and our approach brings to the table. And what that looks like is you have unknowns, right? You don't always know everything about the market that you're selling into. You don't always know exactly where that market ends and another market begins, where your customer ends and another set of customers begins, and how to actually segment and target the right customer in your market. So what we do is an iterative, responsive research approach. So we start with the unknowns, and we look at what's the lowest cost way of testing the most significant assumption that we have about our market. And that takes the form of smart surveys, of product demonstrations, of prototypes and customer interactions. You can think about it as simple as a Google form, asking the right questions and getting that in front of the right audience, all the way up to a high fidelity functional prototype of your product, and again testing that and understanding how people use it and respond to it, and what they might hope to achieve. There's a great anecdote that I actually heard yesterday about Ski-Doo and the water. What are they called? Water jets. The jet skis. Exactly. Yes. So back in the day, jet skis had a steering apparatus that was on a pivot, and you stood on the flat surface, and you had your throttle and your controls, and in order to bounce along the waves, you had some flexibility in the structure of the jet ski. Now, it turned out that mostly people couldn't balance, right? It was really hard to ride these things. Ski-Doo came up with the idea of actually getting rid of the entire structure, and in order to do that, in order to make it a sit-down experience like a motorcycle, they didn't ask the users of the jet skis, they didn't ask the people that were out there driving them around and trying to improve them that way. They asked everybody at the beach why they weren't out there. And it became very clear that it was too hard to ride. So that ultimately changed the approach entirely. So, your research into your market may be a tactical strategy to ask the right question of somebody that's not in the market that you're looking to sell into. And each of those outputs, so your survey, your prototype, your product, those are the great tools that designers bring to the table. So, good question.
Do you have a question?
Can you talk a little bit about, I went to in December, the graduation show. It was just incredible, and the vision that many of the students had also in terms of like emerging technologies and just what the future would look like was just incredible. And even then also just some of the products that you might use today as well. It's just amazing. So I want to just mention that. But can you also talk a little bit more specifically about the design thinking process? Because it does seem like that's a real integration of all the people, all the main stakeholders in a business, and something that they, at your school, that you're particularly, work on. Yeah.
So design thinking is something that we do all the time, and we really train our students in. Ultimately, the simplest way to think about design thinking is facilitated collaboration, right? So it's not a super secret formula, but it's a process to bring together a range of different types of collaborators, whether those are different departments, whether those are different types of customers, whether those are different types of competitors, and run them through a series of connected exercises where they can begin to lower the barriers between their different points of view and begin to identify alignments and concentricities. And the overwhelming problem with design thinking these days is that everybody thinks they know how to do it. Everybody thinks it's like sticky notes on a whiteboard. But in fact, that's just a small output of what design thinking really is. It's much more important to think about what types of questions you're asking, what's the goal of bringing these people together to solve a problem, how are you motivating them to actually share their real thoughts and feelings. And that comes down to a much more nuanced view of all of the components of the process. So everything up from how are you inviting them to the design thinking exercise? What are their expectations of what that experience will be? Are they missing work? Are they already on the same wavelength, or are you trying to bring departments together that have never worked well together? And so to understand that design thinking is the apparatus that you bring all of that background to, and ideally it produces not just one result, but an ongoing set of results. So you can't just do it once and expect you've solved all of your problems. The other key things about design thinking, when there's no stakes involved, people are really willing to be collaborative and kind. They're like, oh yeah, great idea. Oh, that's cool, right? Yeah, good. As soon as there's money to be lost, people go back to their sort of traditional approaches. They rely upon past patterns and past behaviors and the expectations of what they bring to the table professionally, and they aren't necessarily as willing to negotiate and to collaborate. So the key to thinking about design thinking is collaborative facilitation, using a set of design tools that can be a wide range of tools, and doing that not just once, but over time, and thinking about the entire process. As I was saying before, that invitation to the design thinking session is probably the most important first step. Like, are you asking them to come to the right thing and to explore the right, challenge? So it's incredibly powerful, but when done poorly, it kind of just repeats the current status quo. And you don't get anything out of it. And there's a lot of consulting firms that's advertise design thinking, and they do it in this sort of one-off way, and then you pay them a large fee for that process, and then where do you go from there? So what you really want to do is have a design team that continuously runs design thinking exercises, that's always paying attention to how this sits at the company level. So and come to ArtCenter for that.
Hi, Robbie. Thank you. My name is Julia. My question is, how do you prove that your design thinking is powerful and successful? Do you have exactly the case to show to us?
How do you mean the case? Like an example?
Yeah. Do you have a case that you can? Have you ever conducted? Like you're working on a company or entrepreneurs by using your design thinking and make it business successful and more powerful?
Definitely. So I suppose there's so many different examples in different contexts, but really what the way that you measure success with design thinking is not in the outcome of the exercise, but in the assessment of that outcome over time. So it's all well and good for everybody to agree on we need an open office plan, and we need a horizontal organization structure. We're trying to change the system that our company is utilizing. Does the agreement that everybody makes about the outcome of the exercise actually change the results of what you're working on? If it's just an agreement and it doesn't lead to a material strategic change that you can see over time, and that material change might be a slight tweak of a product. It could be just a change of color and packaging. But is that outcome that you've all agreed upon actually something that's happening? And that's why you don't just want to do it once, but you want to have a way to measure the outcome over time. We do this a lot with education, right? So as I was saying, there's a huge range of disciplines in art and design. And how do they come together? How do we teach all of the things that everybody needs to know to all of the departments given the specialties? Well, we regularly convene sessions across our academic departments to discuss these issues. What's lost and what's gained when we add more business to the curriculum? Should we be focusing on writing skills and communication at a very traditional level, right? There's only 40 hours, in a student's quote unquote hours per week that they can work. So how do we fit the right pieces in? ArtCenter students work far more than that, but we really try to do it in a way that is sensitive to the evolution and the outcome, and to our ultimately to our student, who is our client, who is the person that we're serving. You know, are we giving them the best outcome? And if we're not practicing that, how the heck are they going to practice that? So I think it's, you know, the measurement is actually, it's about what happens after that final summary or that final deliverable that, you know, the exercise is over and here's what we learned. It's the step after that that you really find out whether the exercise was successful. So I think you have to be able to have somebody that's paying attention and knows what was agreed and whether or not it's happened. Depends on it could happen overnight or it could take 5 years. So, you know, with a complicated, like a large business scenario, and this goes back to the McKinsey study, you really need to have a team that is analyzing this and a CEO or a leadership structure that's paying attention, because everybody agrees when you get them into the room. You know, it's like, all right, yeah, we're going to go to this. And then everybody dissipates and they all go back to their traditional ways. And it's where collaboration falters. So,
hi. So a lot of the, I think what you're kind of talking about is a good idea. Is doing like proposing ideas for solving a problem, testing, iterating, going through that again. And it's just something that I see like product managers doing. I see like talented front end engineers doing, or you know, the CEO sometimes has like a really good. It has left their ego at the door and is like really laser focused on the user. So a lot of your slides kind of present design as a person, but is this more of a concept, or are we talking about like you really need to get a specific person in the room?
Great. So the easiest answer is if you're a startup and you have, you know, a co-founder and you're hiring that next person, that would be the person instance. And if you're IBM, you're hiring 5,000 designers globally and running them as a team. Interestingly, IBM's relationship with design and engineering is that one designer is paired with 8 engineers. And so that interplay between those types of resources within the organization is proving to be very effective. Now, you have to have, you know, as a startup, very deep pockets to hire 8 engineers and 1 designer. So at the beginning, think about 1 designer and 1 engineer paired. And you might find, and a lot of our students come with an engineering background. So they know how to build things, they know how things work, and they come to ArtCenter in order to get that customer experience side. So I think, my argument for all of you, especially for the founders in the room, is hire that designer right away today. And that can be 1 person for 4 hours a week. But make sure that it's not just for one output. Make sure it's not just to build you a website or to build you a click-through of your app idea, right? Like you need to have them continuously involved. And a big team as well. So,
good talk, Robbie. One last question for you. It seems like ArtCenter is going through a lot of expansion. Now they have a South Campus in addition to the main campus. For those of us that are not interested in spending $200,000 to get a degree from ArtCenter, are there programs about design thinking that we can take at ArtCenter that can help us understand that whole process a little bit better? And then second question, I know that when Mark Breitenberg was at ArtCenter, he was working a lot. He was kind of like the go-between between ArtCenter and the enterprise. So if there is a company or if there are startups that are interested in utilizing ArtCenter's students and graduates, do they come look for you and you can help make that connection?
So great. So yes, I can be the first point of contact. We have a very robust recruitment apparatus that deals with everything from internships and fellowships all the way up to full-time jobs. We have every term, which is 3 times a year, we're constantly running our programs. We have a grad show in the Pasadena Convention Center, and that's open to the public. And you can go and see a booth with every designer that's graduating, and that spans all of the majors. So you can really go see for yourself the power of this type of thinking, and it's unbelievable the fidelity and the reality that our students produce without any budget and any real investment. And so first thing is come to the grad show, just take a look. It's so cool. And then a lower cost way to engage with ArtCenter is our extension programs. So we run and have run for, I believe, about 30 years now, what was once called public programs and is now ArtCenter Extension, and that's classes for kids, so Saturday classes for elementary and others, and a summer camp, and then there's Saturday High for high school students, and then there's night classes and weekend classes that serve everybody around the region. So those are priced accordingly to the class. So think about $500, $700 kind of experience. You get the same faculty that teach in our day program, and oftentimes ArtCenter students come from the public programs into our degrees, and it's a great place to start. And there's a website. You just have to look for ArtCenter Extension online, and you'll see a list of all of the offerings. And we run year round. There's a different set of choices each term, but it's a great resource. And then also I would say, like, one of our incredible alumni founders is Bruce Haven and Linda Wyman, and they founded lynda.com. And lynda.com was acquired by LinkedIn, which was then acquired by Microsoft, and it's now LinkedIn Learning. And LinkedIn Learning is full of incredible resources. And you could get a very robust overview on design thinking there, I'm sure.